Stanford University.
Welcome to the seminar on People, Computers, and Design. I'm Terry Winograd, and very pleased to have you here for special visitors and speakers today. Quick announcement. Next week, we have Dan Siroker, who sort of a local product. My daughter actually went to high school with him, but he's been doing a lot of really interesting stuff since, including being the major person, or at least one of the major people doing the technology, the computer technology for the Obama campaign. And his talk's going to be on why data won the election for Obama. So he'll be telling his war stories from the election and what he's now moving into. So that's next week, Dan Siroker. This week we have Gary and Judy Olsen, and I should almost do the need no introduction bit because they've been around in the field of human-computer interaction, really leading it since the very early days. In particular, the whole area called computer-supported cooperative work, where they're looking at the use of computers not for just individuals, but for groups of people working together. They've received many honors, including Lifetime Achievement Award from the CHI, the Computer Human Interaction Group, which I won't list, except to say they've gotten smart recently and decided that California was a better place to live. For many years, they were at University of Michigan, leading the development of the information school there. And as of this year, they are now at UC Irvine. And starting off on new projects and new things and enjoying our weather, although we can't tell it up here anymore. But, so I will let them go ahead and introduce the topic, but it's looking again at this question of how people work across distances.
Thank you. Also, thank you for inviting us, and thank you for being here today. It's both Gary and I are alums of Stanford. He has a PhD from Stanford, and I had a postdoc from here. Though it was not so nostalgic coming to this building because all of these buildings didn't exist when we were in school here. So we said, what is this? What is this? Also, I want to acknowledge that this talk could be done by either one of us, the entire thing. And we thought of creative ways to present it. One which would be simultaneously, which is not so much fun. The other is every other word. What was decided instead to do is the traditional thing, is I'm going to kick it off, and then Gary will wrap it up. I'm going to talk about what the past has been that was codified in this particular paper called Distance Matters. This is in HCI Journal 2000. And it itself codified what we had known up to that time about long-distance work and what technology can do and what it cannot do. I'm going to then follow with what we know since the paper, some other work that we've done about long-distance science collaboratories. So scientists that are working in different locations on a particular topic, and when they get connected by technology, what actually happens. So we have some things to add from there. And then Gary's going to pick it up at that point and say, so where are we now? What do we look ahead to? Can we actually work better at long distance, given the technologies and the habits we have of today? The population has changed in its comfort with various kinds of technologies. So this is the original paper, What Distance Matters, and the title of our presentation is What Still Matters About Distance. So distance does matter in that this paper was a summary of the research on distance collaboration, which at the time was extremely difficult to do, but people would overcome it because all these barriers, because there was important work to do, and the people I had to talk to were not in my area. I had to go much further than that. But I'm going to go through the issues, because the issues we have to overcome have not changed, right? The technologies and the habits have changed in this amount of time. So I want to go through what was in the core of the paper of Distance Matters. So there are 4 main things that were covered in that paper that are difficult to do. The ease of communication because of common ground. I'm going to open up each one of these. The nature of the work, how tight the coupling, how many dependencies there are between the people who are in one location and another. The readiness to collaborate, which has a lot to do with the motivation to collaborate. And then the technology readiness, about the personal readiness to actually tackle various kinds of technologies, and also the infrastructure of whether we can support it. There were 3 issues that came up repeatedly having to do with trust. When you don't see people, how do you both establish trust and maintain trust? The difference is in culture, if you're going to work long distance, the longer the distance, the more likely you're going to cross cultural boundaries. And if you can't see them in their daily lives, you don't know what they know, you don't know how they behave, you don't know what's normal. It's very difficult. And then, of course, there's not going to be any technology fix for the time zone difference. There is a nice new paper by Jonathan Cummings talking about if you do not overlap in your day at all with the people you are collaborating, it'll probably take twice as long. Because if you cannot solve a particular problem by a question and answer right away, it's going to be another 24 hours once you lob the question before you get the answer back. So those are things that are not going to go. Yeah, Scott.
So I had one experience and only one where being many time zones apart was great. I was writing a grant proposal, and I went across the pond and hid out in a basement office in France, and every day I would write, and I got almost no email while all my colleagues in California were sleeping. I could ask a whole bunch of questions of everybody I knew. At the end of the day, I would send what I had to my colleagues, and then when I got in the next morning, it had revisions. And it was, being 9 time zones off for writing a proposal is optimal. You've got the internet, but no distraction.
So you lobbed off questions and you got answers, but did you ever have to clarify the answer? What did you mean by that? That's where the stopping happens, right? So you got good stuff back.
That's right. You trade interactivity is a double-edged sword sometimes.
Yeah, right. So you did a lob off to someone else, and they responded in a way that was helpful to you, not in a way that was unhelpful to you, right? So you had good colleagues. Good. All right, so let me go through these concepts one at a time, and then we're going to add another one at the end. It's a delight to have Herb Clark in the room because the idea of common ground is started with his work. It is the idea that you and I know what each other knows, that I can speak to you knowing what you know, and you know that I know that, so that we can actually gauge our conversation to the right level. I don't have to over-explain or I don't have to under-explain so that you have to clarify things with me. So it has to do with both the conversation at the right level and then also knowing in general what you know so I don't duplicate those things or I can understand you better. So the more common ground we have, the easier it is to communicate. And if you don't have natural common ground, and when you're working with some people in another discipline you do not, then you have to work at it. So you have to be conscious about, am I understanding you? Are you understanding me? So we can actually get to the level where the communication is a lot easier. We watched a number of meetings that were being held at Anderson Consulting a long time ago when they existed. And there was a really interesting discussion about system. Where is this system? Where is the client? Where is the server? And they purposely put a newbie in the room. So they will ask the questions like, what did you mean by system? Does it include the individual or is it just the computer? And 20 minutes of discussion came up because people were not understanding what the other was, what level they were talking about. So that's an intervention to make sure that people do have common ground because there's one individual who will not, right? And he or she would be the person asking questions. Yes. The second key concept, did I do that one? Yes, okay. Second key concept is about the nature of the work. So when we're working collaboratively, there's lots of different kinds of work we could do, some of which is tightly coupled and some of which is loosely coupled. So we're going to talk about the concept of coupling. So it has to do with, let me do this and then come back, the extent of dependence that people have on each other and how ambiguous the work is. So the more we depend on each other, the more communication we have to do, and the more ambiguous, the more clarification we have to do. So it actually goes with the amount of communication you have to have in order to get the work done. We've watched a number of organizations where they had tightly coupled work that crossed distance. So one example was some people in Detroit and some people in Mexico that were designing a system, a computing system, and use that word. They were trying to communicate day by day about various decisions they were making and how that impacted the other people. After about 6 months of flailing, going very slowly, they decided to say, no, you're going to do all the database part and we're going to do the engine. All right, so it turned out that by having loosely coupled work where they would communicate once a week instead of 55 times a day, they could actually get the work done. There another example at a large computing company. I was watching the people who were doing the financial roll-ups every month. They had to make a report to the vice presidents about which projects are selling and which ones are not. And they did it so that there was a lot of dependence between the people by product. Said, I want everybody in the world to tell me what their sales were for a particular product, and then I'm going to do everybody in the world on another product. Very tightly coupled work because you're going by product as opposed to location. And it turned out after, again, about 6 months of flailing on this, they decided to roll it up by country. So we get a single set of things from one country that could have a single transformation into a new accounting system. And then by country as opposed to by product. Turned out you have to watch how much back and forth do we have to do over a long distance. Can we repartition the work so we don't have to have that so much? So coupling is another key concept. Design work is very tightly coupled work. So early design, or you're trying to figure out what the content of a proposal is going to be, where things are somewhat ambiguous and we need everybody on board, that's tightly coupled work. Once we know what the outline of a proposal is going to be, then we can partition it into Scott's going to do the introduction and Herb's going to do the experimental design, etc. And we'll all collect the references. That's all partitioning it. You have to have the tight coupling face-to-face or with extremely rich technology. All right? You can still do it at a distance, but you have to recognize how much information has to go back and forth. For example, whether the other person understands you or not. And we're sitting there and you're talking about something and somebody's going like this, and you can see that, then you know you have to stop and clarify. Right? If you're just lobbing these things off by email or doing even by audio, it doesn't always give you the feedback about whether somebody has understood or not. So financial reporting, design, those are all tightly coupled work. And both kinds, in our experience, we've seen people either reorganize the work or just stop doing it. A counterexample is we've studied a lot of space physicists who are working all around the world. This turns out to be a very slow science. What they're trying to do is wait for sunspots to come for the sun and then hit solar wind onto the Earth and change its magnetic center. So they're looking for it. They can tell that something's happened in the sun and they're just waiting for this thing to arrive. They all get on the system and they can both look at what's happening and then store it and then analyze it later. They do some discussion over chat about what they think is happening, but the real science is happening later in a partitioned way. It's both slow and then partitioned, and that can happen over time through technologies. All right, the third key concept is what we call collaboration readiness. It has to do with the motivation and the incentives to collaborate. Why are these people working together? It could be that in our domain, people naturally share. It turns out in space physics, it is a bit of a beleaguered field, and when you are in that field, you're so glad to find somebody else who's willing to do this with you. And so there's a lot of natural collaboration. Right? We're going to do this. We have sort of group self-efficacy. We can do this. And it was done through technology, and they really thought they could overcome the barriers. Other organizations, like AIDS researchers, is another group that we've studied. They are not very collaborative because they are spoiling for a Nobel Prize. And so they don't want to share so much. They don't want to all collaborate on their data and put it in one place because they're afraid somebody will scoop them. All right? They want credit for it, and therefore they'll say they'll put the data in, but they won't put it all in, and therefore collaboration fails. Physicians are not particularly collaborative, or physicians of the last, I don't know, up until recently, physicians have not been particularly collaborative, but we're now seeing physicians around the world saying, well, it's so little data I have on a particular disease, maybe if I can share my patient data with somebody else who has a rare disease, all right, then we can aggregate and both find out what's going on and look for cures. So there are lots of motivations now to actually collaborate. A number of organizations also, in order to succeed, they write themselves what they call rules of the road. I call it a communication covenant. It is, all right, how are we going to share? It could be at the low level of, I'm going to answer my email 15 times a day or only once a day, so I know when to expect something to come back. How are we going to share the data? Who gets credit in a publication for sharing? It turns out in one collaboratory, they have the authors of the article, and then they name the collaboratory as another author, and it's footnoted as to the date they got it, and then you can look up the list of all the people that contributed the data. They're not actually authors, all right, because they didn't contribute to the ideas that are generated in the paper, but they contributed to the data source. So the rules of the road, communication covenants are extremely important. Here's an example. You're not expected to read this, but it has to do with how are we going to behave, basically. I've actually made my students do this in group projects and classes now. I make them like the first week, a communication covenant, which is here's all the ways we're going to access each other. When we have something to write together, we're going to put it on, I don't care, Google Docs or some file server. When I put in an edit, everybody's expected to read it within 3 hours or tell us why not. If you don't show up to a meeting, then you have to bring the food to the next meeting. All right. Little things like that, they generate these rules about, okay, we're going to behave like this. I also make them halfway through the quarter, go through their communication covenant and say, is this working? Right? Do you need to add some things? Is there new rules that you've discovered about this? So they have to do not only communication covenants, but then Gantt charts of their whole quarter about when the busy times are going to be, et cetera. So they know to prepare ahead of time that I have 4 exams and a paper due on a particular day, therefore I'm going to do this one early. Things like that. So it's how are we going to behave? Right, the 4th key concept, and you're going to recognize now that this was 2000 when we did this, has to do with collaboration technology readiness. How able am I to use technology in order to get my work done? The first set of space physicists that we looked at did not use email very much. They actually collected their data by flying to Greenland and taking the disks home with them. They'd stay for 2 weeks because it was 2 weeks until the next military transport left the place. So they take it home with them. That's sneaker net or airline net, I guess. So if you wanted to then take this set of people and immediately give them, I don't know, immersive 3D whatevers, all right, they're not going to be ready. And in fact, this particular collaboratory, the space physics one, succeeded because I believe one of the key things was if you went to Greenland and went and saw all the instruments they were looking at, all right, they replicated all of that onto the computer screen. So it was familiar to them. You know, they saw the little meters go this way and they saw the radars go around like that. In the end, the interface looked nothing like that because they eventually realized what the technology could do for them to translate those things into things more like a mental model of what was going on. But at the beginning, it would have been a much too big a step. So we did like 5 iterations of the interface to help them make the leap into the next, to understand the next things are going on. At the time, we're also trying to find some ordering of what do people adopt first and second and third. What's your measure of technology readiness? Where are you on a scale so we don't take you too fast, too far? So it says email, attachments, these are all, you know, our lifeblood these days. Using repositories, calendaring system, group calendaring systems, and in the mid-90s, those were not very popular. People thought of group calendaring systems as, I'm going to do all this work so somebody can schedule up my time in meetings. All right. Now we live by these group calendars. It's awareness of what other people are doing. You can keep control over your own time, things like that. So the people have changed in the meantime. So handoff collaborations was what Scott was talking about. I send them a draft. They send me answers and edits the next day. And then synchronous collaboration was not common at the time. We had built a small application called Shred It that allowed everybody to access and change anything in the document simultaneously. The only thing you couldn't do was have your cursor here and I would backspace over it. All right? But nothing was protected. And everybody said, that's nuts, you can't do it, or it's going to be chaos. And it turned out that people, when they actually use it, they sit down and say, so is it okay if I change that word? And they didn't have this chaos. It was sort of, oh, I see what you're doing, I'll do that too. So it was a very different, but people would not make the leap from how they did their work until seeing this. They had to feel it before they could understand what the value was. It's a little bit like Google Docs now, but this was 15 years ago that we were doing that. If you're in a particular level of technology readiness, you can't take too big a leap, is what this is about. I also like this, you need training in the technologies and how to collaborate. I was doing some investigation of how IBM itself was adopting Lotus Notes. And so I was talking to a number of the higher level people in strategy, and this guy's walking down the hall with me, just, you know, an interview on the hoof. I said, so why are you not using it? And he said, well, they gave me all these classes about how to use the interface, but they didn't tell me how it was going to fit my work. What am I supposed to put in there so other people can get it? And why do I want to share, or what the benefit will be? So you not only learn, you know, how to run the thing, but then how it fits in your life. And there are very few times we've seen people being trained in that. All right, the 5th concept I'm adding is since our work on that particular paper. It's added in a chapter, in this book, Scientific Collaboration on the Internet, which just came out this last year, is a compilation of the work we've done since Distance Matters about science collaboratories. A lot of individual cases in there of things that we've participated in and some of the higher level things about what different kinds of collaboratories are there, but also this theory. It's called the Theory of Remote Scientific Collaboration, TORSC, and it has the 4 concepts I just talked about, which we kept finding in these science collaborations, plus the one about management. So management and decision making turns out to be very important in all kinds of collaborations. In the corporate world, it's there already. The management is, but maybe not the transparent decision making. Turns out to be very important that you trust people to make decisions that don't harm you. And if you're in a collaboration with lots of other equals, it's not clear who's going to be in charge and who, when the funding gets cut, are people going to look out for your best interests as well as their own. There's a very nice article by Cummings and Kiesler that studied the National Science Foundation KDI proposals, and which were often multidisciplinary and either in a single location or several locations. And they did a numeric study on this, and it turned out if you're co-located, meaning on the same campus, you're much more likely to succeed than if you're distributed. And furthermore, distributed success associated with good management. So having a manager, not necessarily the chief scientist. I mean, how many of us have been trained in management principles? You know, about 6 out of 1 million people. So being a good manager, in some cases, means hiring somebody who's a project manager, who is not necessarily the chief scientist or even in that domain, but they know how to organize a project, about allocating resources, about communicating, making sure things are up to date, etc. The National Science Foundation doesn't normally like to spend money on things that aren't science, but it turned out this was a key step in getting the science to happen. Right? So management turns out to be very important. So let me tell you a little bit about the work we've done since 2000 on Distance Matters and the work on scientific collaboratories, because they're related in that we were confirming some of the ideas we had in Distance Matters and then looking further into what else we needed to know. So what we did is we had already participated, I say we, and it's not just Gary and me, there's about 15 other people in a research group doing this. We knew of a large set of collaboratories. Collaboratories are laboratories that span distance, so it's like the blend of the word collaboration and laboratory. And we had identified about 200 examples at the time. This is probably 5 years ago. It's slightly out of date now, and we're getting back into it now that we've moved. And for each of these, we collected what we called the collaboratory at a glance. It's actually like a little baseball card. So it's got the picture, which is their logo, and then a whole bunch of standard facts along the back. So how many locations, how many people are involved, is it multidisciplinary or single discipline, et cetera. What is the main job of all of this? So it's a little collaboratory at a glance. When it started, when it's expected, where the funding is coming from. So, and then what we do across all of these 200 then is to look at the similarities and differences. Are they all the same? No. Well, in what dimensions do they differ? And then how can we predict whether, for example, a particular collaboratory is going to get refunded, get renewed in its work, or how does it succeed? So this is what the list looks like. This is at www.scienceofcollaboratories.org. This is public. It's a list of the collaboratories we have identified, and for each one that we actually have the baseball card for, it's underlined and clickable. And then, so this is the collaboratories at a glance. This is what one of the pages would look like. This is the baseball card part. So it's standard information across as many collaboratories as we can gather. So there's no, this is just data collection, not doing a lot of the analysis yet. But then this is alphabet soup to you, but to us these are all very important deep projects. So these are collaboratories that we have been either involved in directly or did a lot of deep interviewing of the individuals there, so we could get more information about their motivations, their collaboration readiness, some of the barriers that came up. So it's a number that and a number of these are individual chapters in the book. They are the cases we looked at. These are what generated the theory of remote scientific collaboration, which is a compilation of both the literature about collaboration. So there's a lot of literature in organizational behavior and business schools. And then what we saw in a number of collaboratories that didn't work. They failed because of this, or this was an extremely hard barrier and it took us another 2 years to overcome that. So this theory grew from the literature and then the bottom up about all the things we thought were going to matter. What we haven't done yet is to go back to all the collaboratories and say, are these 42 things important? Right? So we have a list, but we don't know the weights of each one of these, or which ones are killers, which ones are, you can overcome with various kinds of things. So from all of this, what do we know that succeeds today, which was 10 years ago? Okay, because Gary's going to do the update from there. So co-location is important for tightly coupled work, and that's something we can all understand. Because you get common ground and rapid, rich interaction for free. All right? It's because you've got, you can see a lot, you know the distance between people, you know what's happening outside, you know in general what people know because you've known them. Remote work is okay if it's loosely coupled because it doesn't require the high interaction, but we also suggest that you use the highest bandwidth you can if it starts getting ambiguous or you have to do a lot of communication back and forth. And that tells you a lot about common ground. I have to tell you one incident where we were using video that they had to finally point the camera out the window to tell why people were not there yet. Gary and I were in London, and we were communicating with people in Chicago, and that's an 8-hour time difference, so it was very early for them and quite late for us. And we noticed that there was only one woman had come to work, and she was wearing curlers. I'm going, this is Anderson Consulting, what's going on? And nobody was coming, and nobody is coming, and nobody's coming. She took the camera, pointed it out the window, and it was a huge blizzard. Right? She was just trying to dry her hair before her whole day had to go with, and I think she put the video mute on so we couldn't see this. But there was a case where the video really helped with understanding the behavior. It wasn't that people were not wanting to come and see us, all right? They were having difficulty getting there. So we also know that when you're working long distance for a long time, it's really important to travel occasionally. People say, well, how long can you go before you have to travel again? That's a parameter that only you know, because if you have a lot of common ground and a lot of history, just hearing somebody's voice on the phone will do it for you. You sort of remember who these people are, and you have that bond. If there are people you don't know, then it really is important to go travel with them, work things out, and also have a meal together that sort of build that friendship and trust. You should look for organizations that are naturally collaborative. We've given talks like this to the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Health because they want to know where to put their money. These collaboratories are very expensive. And if we know beforehand that a particular domain is not very collaborative, the red flag goes up of how this is actually going to work. And then we want to look for organizations that are collaboration technology ready, both the infrastructure, the networking capabilities, they're all on the same platform, and that the people have facility with these things and can actually get those things done. Also projects that are managed well, that was the Keesler-Cummings piece, and that decision making in general is free of favoritism, fair and open, and everybody has an opportunity to influence. It doesn't mean it's democratic. It means that people can be heard and are taken into consideration when decisions are actually made. So tomorrow, at the time, we talked a lot about trust, culture, time zones, and other things that were barriers for people that we did not yet see how to overcome. And Gary's going to pick it up from here about now what still matters about distance.
Okay, so it's 10 years since we did that review, and a lot has happened in the intervening time. That there's been a lot of research on these issues. The literature is very rich with new findings and new pieces of understanding. There's a huge array of new and improved technologies and big changes in the experience base. People have been doing this and now know some things, have some intuitions or some systematic knowledge about what does or doesn't work. I think one of the interesting things is that there's no question but what working at a distance is going to become even more common. So just because it's hard, people aren't going to stop doing it. And so we're going to live with it. This is some data from a survey that was conducted recently that a huge majority of companies, especially large ones, say they're going to increasingly depend on virtual teams, teams that are put together to do a task but are not in the same location. And they even recognize what some of the challenges are. For example, a lot of the respondents have said that managing these teams is very, very tricky, very difficult. That just because you're good at managing co-located groups doesn't mean you're good at managing distributed groups. And a huge majority said that they realized that establishing and maintaining trust is extremely important in virtual teams. So the bottom line is, at least certainly for projects of any sort of size or complexity, this is going to be the way we work in the future. And so it really is important that the kind of obstacles that Judy just kind of summarized are ones that we can figure out how to deal with. So what I'm going to do, just to anticipate, we haven't solved all this yet, but I think what we have seen are hopeful signs. Now, when I've said this in the past, people said, yeah, well, you're kind of doing a half full, but others want to do the half empty rhetoric on this. So, I'm giving a kind of optimistic twist to things, but as you'll see when I conclude, I still am going to recognize that this is still a very difficult problem. So anyway, these are some kind of a survey of hopeful signs, and they're sort of more in the nature of noticings, and a lot of these are things that are going to have to sort of drive research over the coming years. So with the problem of I'm going to use the same sort of set of categories that Judy used. So for the set of for the issues of common ground, I think there are a couple of very hopeful signs. One is, of course, the kind of take-up of work on knowledge management. That is where people put together databases, repositories, whatever, of things that organizations know. This is becoming more common, more routine. Yes, there are a lot of problems with it. There are lots of documentation of some of the issues involved. There's some really deep motivational issues. Why would I want to share what I know with the rest of the organization? And there have been some colossal failures of things like Lotus Notes and other things that were meant to facilitate sharing. On the other hand, there have been some very creative compensation schemes or incentive schemes that have been tried. One I saw on a company that failed, but it was where they actually linked your compensation to not only that you put things into the knowledge management system, but that others used it. And that then when it came time for your annual review, they had data on that. And so were you contributing things that were useful for the organization? And of course, the whole area of awareness, that's been a huge topic of research in the last decade in the CSCW field. That is, how can I know what's going on with my collaborators who are not where I am? When you're co-located, you have lots of knowledge about who's in their office, are they on the phone, is the door closed, are they in a meeting, whatever. When someone is on a different continent, those are very difficult things to figure out. There's been an enormous amount of work on this, and I think a lot of really encouraging kinds of findings having to do with using things like instant messaging for awareness, the buddy list and so on, various kinds of audio and chat mechanisms, various kinds of social proxies that have been explored by a number of different people and so on. So I think there's a vast suite of tools that now are available to help us understand better what our colleagues are doing at another location. And there's some really interesting experiments going on. We're collaborating right now with Microsoft on a project, and they have several team members on a particular team that we're working with, where one person moved to the East Coast who'd been a member of a group in Redmond for a long time, and another person in the Bay Area joined the same team, but is going to continue to live in the Bay Area. So they have two remote people. Well, what they've done is they've built what we call an embodied social proxy. There's a big screen on a cart, and the person, this kind of represents the person. And so one version of it is you see the person in the screen. You can talk with them and chat with them and so on. The person on the other end has multiple cameras they can control, so they're kind of aware of the context and can also focus in on people. When the person is not there, what you see then is some status information, their access to their calendar, what they've been working on recently, and so on. What they actually do, these people have offices in Redmond. So George has an office, and if he's working by himself, he's in his office, and you can just go in there and sit down and have a conversation with him as though he were really there. When they have a meeting that George has to be in, they then take the cart and wheel it into the meeting room, and he sits around the table, just exactly like anybody else in the meeting. And so it's an interesting way of sort of embodying George in a technological medium where it seems like he's just part of the group. Now that's an interesting case because he was a member of this group for, I don't know, more than a decade. And so he knows the people really well, they know him really well, and so on. The kind of interesting twist on this is John, who is in the Bay Area, just joined this team. And they've embodied him in the same fashion. And they're actually right now doing some data collection on how George and John are kind of playing out in this situation. To me, what's interesting about this is sort of taking all these different findings from the awareness research of the last decade and kind of putting it all together into a real working prototype of how to deal with a quite interesting situation where your collaborators are somewhere else. Also in terms of common ground, with mobile technologies, it's increasingly the case that people on your team are kind of always available, whether it's through mobile phones or other kinds of mobile devices and so on, so that it's easy to just touch base with them if they have a quick question or whatever. The downside of all this is people are stressed because they're kind of, quote, at work all the time. And we heard an interesting talk at Irvine a few weeks ago about a case, a field study at Intel, where people were deliberately disconnecting themselves so they just get away from this, constant monitoring. But it is at least possible. And so once again, you have sort of a better link with people on a kind of a regular basis, so you know what they're doing, you know where they are, and whether they're available or not. The nature of the work. I think the kind of examples that Judy gave were basically projects reorganized the work by a geography when they found it was too hard to have it organized in some way that would cross geographical locations. There's sort of more understanding now, I think, in organizations about this, and sort of increased realization that if you're going to distribute work across sites, that except for some special cases, and the special cases are interesting, but except for special cases, you'd better figure out a way to kind of divide and conquer the work so you don't stress the communication links as much. There's a lot more understanding about this in the organizations that we've looked at. And of course, the appropriate mixing of face-to-face interactions with distributed interactions to kind of get the work organized and keep monitoring it. Collaboration readiness. A lot better understanding of the role of incentives. One sort of legalistic way is to have explicit contracts about how the work is going to proceed and what the expectations are and so on. I mean, certainly some of the funding agencies, particularly the military funding agencies, have had this requirement for a stream of deliverables, status reports, monthly reports, just a way of keeping tabs on the project, and translating this into these distributed teams as one way to kind of keep things moving. It is, Judy didn't really mention this, but in one of the domains where we've seen the most failure due to collaboration readiness is cases where funding agencies require collaboration. That is really dangerous. And we've seen some even extreme examples where people just totally game the system. They pretend they're going to collaborate, get the money, and then just divide it up and go their separate ways. But indeed, even when people try to collaborate, when it's been mandated by the funding agency, it's very dangerous. I think the result of that is that, at least I know at NSF and maybe at NIH, I'm not as familiar there, they're trying to look into this more at the proposal stage. Actually requiring, for example, you write sections on governance, how you're going to run the project and so on, and try to see that you've thought through some of these issues. And so recognizing that mandated collaboration is risky, how do you sort of guard against that?
Gary, when funding agencies require collaboration, what do you think their motivation is?
Well, I think it has to. There could be a variety, but I think a key motivation is that they figure the science problems are hard enough that you're going to need to put together expertise of various kinds to attack them. That's a very common reason for wanting to collaborate in scientific research. So that's probably the main driver. Yeah.
So building on that, do you think if funding agencies didn't require collaboration, those scientists wouldn't come to the conclusion that they should work with these other people over there that have this expertise? They don't?
It clearly is the case that scientists on their own generate reasons for collaborating and build up these collaborations and so on. I think what happens is that these sort of indigenous collaborations have a much higher success rate because people lay the right groundwork, get to know these colleagues and so on. But when you have a deadline, you got to, by December 5th, you got to submit this thing, and it's got to have collaboration in it, and you want money, people put these things together in short time frames and so on without building up that foundation that makes for success. Yeah?
I've been engaged in several EU, European Union collaborations, and they're very explicit about forming the right group, getting funding if you have someone from Southern Europe as well as from Northern Europe. And I'm curious whether you know much about the success of that. It seems very artificial.
And there's a lot of failure. Yeah, we've looked at a lot of that. Very risky, very risky. I mean, in that case, I think there are, political motivations for doing that and sort of things that are kind of exogenous to the science itself. But we've seen some, in fact, some amazing failures that we've seen just in the last year or so.
But isn't artificial participation requirements a problem independent of whether you're remote?
Yeah, but if it's remote, it just exaggerates the seriousness of it. In fact, that is a point. I mean, the set of things that Judy went through are problems for any collaboration, not just for distance collaborations, but I think their weight and their criticalness is even more so with distance collaboration. I think particularly the management one. Yeah.
You mentioned indigenous collaboration. What comes to my mind is the accelerator-based physics community and the observatory-based and also urban observatory-based astronomical community. Do you see any lessons?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of lessons out of it. I think the physics, at least the high energy physics example, is one we looked at a lot. I mean, remember that they engaged in what's probably one of the most amazing collaborative project ever in the Manhattan Project. And in that experience over a 4-year period, or whatever it was, they learned a lot about how to manage a really big, complicated project. And they carried that on after the war. And you look at the evolution of these accelerator projects, for example. I mean, they've grown in size and scale, so that's incredible. I mean, the projects around the Large Hadron Collider involve thousands of principal investigators. But if you look at the history over a half century, they had smaller collaborations, they worked those out, they figured out sort of organizational principles and management principles. They grew, so the next evolution was a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. And over a 60-year period, they really learned how to run and manage large projects, including hiring professional management people to help them with that.
And they have these hugely expensive instruments.
Pardon?
And they have these hugely expensive instruments that have to be.
Yeah, I mean, they have to. Yeah.
They also spend a lot of time face-to-face. They will go to CERN and, spend 2 weeks there, and it turns out a lot happens at lunchtime.
Right. On the issue of trust, which Judy had mentioned, there's been a lot of research on this because, the mantra, going back to the management gurus, was that trust takes touch. And it's sort of a famous line out of the management literature. Well, you can't always touch. And what do? We've done a lot of work in this area, a lot of experimental work, looking at ways in which you could intervene for distributed groups and at least establish some trust and maintain it. Now, what we've seen in our research is that what's encouraging is to promote non-work-related social interaction, either before they start a project or during a project. Have them talk about things other than what the work is about. That helps with establishing trust and maintaining it over time. The issue that we're left with, though, is that seems like it's a very difficult process and a very fragile process. So it's sort of a encouraging sign, but I think there's a lot more work to do with that. And as I say, the issue is there is a role for non-work related activity in work. And establishing and maintaining trust is one of the most important dimensions of that. Technology readiness, the world is very different from 10 years ago. That many new sort of social and communicative technologies have emerged, a much wider range of options for, say, back-channel communication and so on. And I think in particular, and I think this is something that we have to really watch, that there are generational changes. I mean, today's college students have a whole different outlook on technology than, say, I did or we did when we were in college. And they're entering the workforce. They're going to be the scientists and so on. And I think that just makes for a whole different picture. I sometimes jokingly tell my CSEW class that one thing about this field is we need to repeat the work every generation because there are such powerful cohort effects. And those of you who are behavioral scientists know about cohort effects. It has to do with sort of where you are on the historical spectrum for your kind of age clustering. And in this area, there are just huge effects on those lines. And we've seen actual demonstration of that. A famous example is the one, Jonathan Gruden's famous paper written a number of years ago on why CSCW applications fail. It was during the early days of CSCW, and it just turns out there was, not a whole lot of, other than email, there wasn't a whole lot of success. The kind of whipping boy he looked at was calendaring systems, which had been introduced, group calendaring systems had been introduced, and organizations were just not using them at all, even though management mandated them. Well, about a decade later, Alicia Palin, one of Jonathan's students at Irvine, sort of looked again at this whole issue and found, stunning success in the use of online calendaring systems and group calendaring systems and so on. Well, what had happened? I mean, several things had happened. The technology was better and so on, but it was also a different set of people who were now using these kinds of things. And they had a whole different attitude about technology and sharing and so on. So I think that's a nice illustration of this, this point. Technology readiness, the technologies themselves are a lot better. I mean, there's a long-standing story in the CSCW world about how much video conferencing sucks. I mean, it's just awful. And it goes back, Carmen Neguito wrote a paper back in 1988 did sort of a literature review of video conferencing, and there was another big review done in the late 90s and so on, just showing that people just hated it. And for reasons that we now understand, I think, a lot, that the social ergonomics, the sort of details about how you engage people in the social interactions through video conferencing were just horrible and so on. But now there are really, really good systems out there. Now this happens to be a very expensive one, or at least currently very expensive, but it's got sort of a lot of details right. And there are coming down the pipeline even more interesting systems that are going to be more affordable for most of us. So the technologies themselves are a lot better for supporting these kinds of interactions. On the management and decision-making front, there's at least a boom on books on how to run virtual teams. There must be scores of these books. I'm aware of at least a couple dozen myself already. At least people are now recognizing that running a virtual team is very different than running any old co-located team. And they're starting to articulate what the principles are, what you need to know, what you need to look for in managers who are going to run virtual teams, and so on. So I think that's, again, sort of a real encouraging sign. I mentioned that we found some good, promising results on establishing and maintaining trust, better support for sort of awareness and the sense of presence of other people. There's a famous attribution error made in distance interactions where, if you're down the hall and I've sent you some email and you don't reply, I say, well, but he's out, he's busy, he's in a meeting, whatever. He'll get back to me later. If I do the same thing at a distance, especially if I don't know the person very well, I don't get a reply, I say, oh, they're dissing me. I mean, you tend to make situational attributions for co-located people and dispositional attributions for distant people. Well, that's a source of great organizational trouble if you're going to start, making bad assumptions about your colleagues. If you have better awareness of what's going on, then you have a better understanding of why the person isn't responding. It's a holiday today in France, for example. Culture. This is a big one, and I think there's going to be an ongoing discussion about cultural issues in the CSLB world for a long time. Just this last February, there was a nice conference held here at Stanford on intercultural collaboration. And there's now kind of an emerged ACM conference series in that area. And so people are kind of aware now of the fact that these are complicated issues. And also, I think there's growing sophistication that culture isn't just about national culture. It's about, big countries like the US or China or India are collections of dozens of cultures. And so you've got to understand better these, we might call them the subcultures or whatever. There's too much of a tendency in the past research on culture, at least in this area, to equate culture with national differences. And I think that's now, people are trying to realize that's way too oversimplified. So there's sort of more awareness now that culture is an issue. There's a beginning of more research taking place on this, sort of an increasing sophistication about what culture actually means. Again, an explosion of literature on this. These books on culture shock, a whole series of these have excellent sales, at least have had excellent sales. There are university programs in this area. NSF has a big program on culture differences and so on. And also companies have gotten more sophisticated about this. We've seen, for example, if you have multiple cultures, then a concrete example, this was a case in the auto industry where they were doing design in the US, France, and Germany. They were designing a transmission for a common set of cars. Well, somebody from France came and lived in the US for a year. Somebody from the US went and lived in Germany for a year, and so on. So they could be kind of the eyes and ears for their colleagues at the other site. So you could interpret what was happening. You know, why did they react that way? What's going on? Where are they today? Oh, it's a holiday, okay. And that kind of job rotation helps, because it gives you a translation source locally, which can improve things. Time zones. As Judy mentioned, the work that Jonathan Cummings is doing on this, he did a large study at Intel of interactions between their main office in the Portland area and sites in India. And then Portland and the Bay Area, and then Portland and India. And when you don't have overlaps in the workday, your behavior just changes dramatically. People will adjust a little bit to this. I mean, you can say, well, I can stay later or come in earlier or whatever, so I can have some overlap with my colleagues way over there. People resist that. They don't want to make those kinds of changes in their regular daily routine. And it was actually amusing that it was particularly the people, I think, in India who didn't want to adjust their hours at all. So they switched from predominantly synchronous communication to predominantly asynchronous communication. Well, you can communicate that way, but it just changes the whole nature of the collaboration. And I think a big area of research for CSCW is awareness, asynchronous awareness tools, because almost all the awareness research that we've looked at has been for synchronous situation. What is Herb doing right now? And you know, I can do it automatically with sensors and stuff like that. Is his door open or closed? Stuff like that. A lot of interesting work of that nature. But we have very little work now on asynchronous awareness.
So, do you think things like Facebook and Flickr are asynchronous awareness tools?
They can be. Yeah. Yeah. That's sort of a beginning step, a little baby step along those lines. We were for a while in discussions with a group at a university in Singapore about setting up a center on collaboration. And you know, we were scratching our heads about how in the world are we going to do this with our huge time difference and so on. And it got us really thinking about how could they know what we did today when they started working their next work day and so on. And it's really hard to think about what would work effectively. And but I think that's a really rich area for research. Okay, I want to sort of wrap up with an analogy. I recently read this book called Fallen Giants, and it's about the history of mountaineering in the Himalaya. And by the way, I recommend it as a book, whether you're interested in mountain climbing or not. It's just a really interesting history, and it goes into kind of the political and social and cultural context of what happened, as well as just the athletic context of it. So in the early days, well, the relatively early days, when the highest peaks in the Himalaya were first conquered in the 1950s, you know, the first 8,000 meter peak was climbed in 1950. Everest which is the highest at 8,850 meters, was first climbed in 1953. And the other 12 8,000 meter peaks were climbed sometime between 1953 and 1964. So there was this, you know, wave of conquering the highest mountains on the planet. If you looked at what these early climbs were like, first of all, they involved huge logistical efforts. A lot of the climbs would take up to a year of planning, putting together teams. The climbs themselves were typically long ascents with many camps along the way. This shows the route used by the Hillary expedition to first climb Everest, and there are just each of these black dots is a camp where they would bring supplies there, pitch tents, set it up, and then acclimate to that altitude for a while, maybe for 3 or 4 days. And then when the weather was cooperative, they would go up and set up the next camp. Huge numbers of Sherpas who would help bring all the supplies up and so on. The climbing parties were large. So a typical climbing party would have maybe somewhere between 12 and 24 climbers, the people who were going to be candidates to make the ascent to the summit. And then hundreds of support people who would move all this equipment and supplies and so on. These climbs made extensive use of oxygen because for physiological reasons at high altitude. Typically the climbs were done in very narrow seasons because of weather issues. The weather was either in the hospital or the ice falls were too bad or dangerous or whatever, so they typically only have a few weeks where they could actually do some climbing. But many of these activities failed. I think the failure rate was somewhere close to 50%. I mean, expeditions that resulted in death, somewhere around 50%. Many more didn't make it to the summit. So these expeditions had very interesting characteristics. Now, since the 1950s, we've seen enormous change. So many new routes have been explored. Like, for example, on Everest, there were thought to be many routes that were just unclimbable. You just couldn't do it. But now, I forget how many, but there are dozens of different routes up Everest that have been successfully climbed. You see many climbs with very small parties, 2, 3, 4 people. In fact, the most amazing was Reinhold Messner climbed Everest all by himself and without oxygen and in 1 day. I mean, extraordinary. As I say, more ascents without oxygen, and in a given season, hundreds and hundreds of ascents. In fact, Everest now has a problem of traffic jams. There may be 60, 70, 80 people trying to make the summit on 1 day. And of course, that's actually resulted in some bad, if you've ever interested, the book Into Thin Air is about expeditions in the 21st century that took basically amateurs up to the top. And one particular day, one particular time period of a few days, there were just numerous fatalities. So it's become more routine that you can climb these peaks, more people can do it, and so on. Still very dangerous, though. I mean, there still are just repeated fatalities as people engage in these climbs. Well, what changed? I think a lot of things changed. First of all, we know a lot more about these mountains. The maps are better. There have been a lot of aerial surveys, much better understanding about the weather and how to read the weather. Much more experience with climbing itself. Many new techniques for how to climb. Much better understanding of physiology at high altitude, so we can understand better what's happening and avoid some of the problems of the past. Obviously, much better, equipment. The equipment has changed totally. The clothing, the technical aids, and so on. But it is still very difficult. It's a very dangerous, difficult thing to climb one of these 8,000 meter peaks, and it will continue to be. Well, I think this is analogous to our situation. So in the area of distance collaboration, we know a lot more, we have a lot more experience, organizations are more savvy about these kinds of things, individuals are more aware of what some of the issues are, we have much better tools, but it is still difficult, and I think our expectation is it'll continue to be difficult forever. Thank you.
Happy to take questions.
So one of the areas, one thing I didn't hear you talk at all about today was gaming.
Games.
Yeah, collaborative gaming online, either synchronous or asynchronous. And that seems to be something that very much involves trust, organization, that sort of thing. And it also seems to be incredibly successful.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes. There's been a lot of speculation that multiplayer games might be a good arena for learning collaborative skills. In fact, John C. Brown wrote a little piece in Wired magazine a year or two ago where he thought that it might be the case that in the future your resume will have to contain your World of Warcraft level. And he has an example of somebody who was hired by a Silicon Valley company, apparently largely on his reputation for having reached whatever level 80 or whatever the top level is in World of Warcraft. And had, the top levels in World of Warcraft require managing these very complicated teams as they take, do these quests and so on. So it could be. I mean, there was actually a panel at Michigan that John put together a couple of years ago that kind of had a lot of discussion about this. There's a lot of speculation that these may be incredibly good arenas for learning. Absolutely no research. So we need some research to look at that.
I mean, I haven't done any, obviously, but I would speculate that two of the big things are that the goals are so clearly defined in games, and the feedback is so explicit. And it seems like you don't get that in the real world. And
well, projects vary a lot on that. I mean, some projects have very explicit goals and have good feedback, and others are much more ambiguous and so on. So it might be that to the extent you're learning skills in those game contexts, they might transfer to some kinds of situations. But that's still speculation.
Stu?
Oh.
Given the social networking tools now, there may be a shift to more asynchronous collaboration from synchronous collaboration just because you use these tools.
So, say a little bit more about that.
Well, as opposed to your telemeetings where everybody sits around, or the fact that you collaboratively build up a product for multiple people.
I forgot what I was going to say. I got so wrapped up. I think there are interesting ways to set a problem out there and then see who can solve it as some way of getting things done. So that's asynchronous and more like a market mechanism that could be used if you have enough talented people out there.
Well, what I was going to say is that, you know, again, in the CSCS world, there's been a lot of focus on synchronous interaction, you know, support for face-to-face meetings, conferencing, audio, video, so on. If you actually look at work, those are sort of episodes in a larger context where most of the work takes place asynchronously. And I think there hasn't been as much work on how that all fits together. How does the synchronous activity fit in with the asynchronous activity and so on? Now, whether as a result of experience with things like social games and so on, there's a shift in that, I think we need to, first of all, establish where we are in terms of a baseline in this mix of synchronous and asynchronous work.
In particular, if you divide work into content work and coordination work,
Yeah.
that when you can get off of, do it with Wiki or some of these other things, coordination work may go down to the point where asynchronous collaborative work becomes more attractive than it is.
Well, and Bonnie Nardi and Steve Whitaker did this nice paper a few years ago that showed that, you know, so at least in the kind of organizations they were looking at, sort of the dominant use of instant messaging was for coordination.
Yeah, because if you think of the face-to-face meeting, causing the cost of coordination work to go down.
So one way of sort of kind of a duality here might be, to what extent does place matter versus distance, sort of as being lack of a proximity or something like that. So what sort of a corresponding handle is there, particularly maybe zeroing in on many of the aspects of a particular place, I mean, especially as our platforms start going with actual, our particular places, like thinking of telepresence and telemedicine, where you have a group consult with a remote patient with the family in the room, and everybody ought to be in at least two places at once.
Well, there's kind of along those lines, there's a lot of interest now in sort of virtual places as venues for collaboration. I know certainly there's a group at Irvine that is looking at virtual worlds for software engineering as places where you could do some of the things that you can now do in, you know, physical places. We just saw some nice demonstrations yesterday at a park of, again, using virtual worlds for certain kinds of teaching and learning. So I think there's some ways in which you can take the place idea and make it into something that supports distributed work. And I think that's another area, really good area for research right now.
I have to also add that the embodied social proxy, excuse me, that we know is going on at Microsoft, there are remote physicians now that are like that. Their laptop, you know, video with a camera on it, et cetera, on a robot. So the physician is indeed going on rounds, right? They'll joystick and stuff, and then having consults in the hall. Also, you know, talking to the patient him or herself, and that can then instantly go to another hospital, pick up that robot, and go on the same kind of thing. Now that's a real place, right? But the person is not in that place.
And they build up some relationship with the people there, and the combination of people and place at this room.
Yes, yes.
What's nice about this example of the doctor is they have gotten a lot of the social ergonomics right. They've done a lot of sort of details correctly, so that it really feels like a person is there, you know.
Well, sort of, with a really square head.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you be the moderator.
So actually, just to add to your point about the embodied persona, there's actually a company in India which has built that. And in fact, here's...
Is it In Touch? No, it's
It's a different system, yeah.
Anybody's. I know In Touch, which is in Santa Barbara.
Move it around and
Yep.
has a camera
Yep.
and everything on it.
Yep.
Yep.
To be able to do that.
We know the company called In Touch that is building the ones, and they've deployed them in about 12 hospitals.
So I was going to turn Sue's question upside down. What might you be able to learn from looking at Facebook, which, after all, is in general you're collaborating at a distance. So I'm collaborating with a whole lot of people, and I've got this big network of things. And so some of the devices that are used in Facebook work and support the kinds of social interactions that you want to have. Others don't work. Is there something you could learn from these social networking devices?
Maybe. I mean, to me, that's not real collaboration. I mean, to me, collaboration is you have a task you're trying to accomplish and a set of people who are doing that task and so on. And this is kind of more like, you know, hanging out. And but you can maybe learn some things from that.
There certainly is a goal there. That is, I'm trying to hook up with, I'm trying to get lots of people. I learned not to use the word hook up.
Yeah, good.
You learned it poorly. It was a term of our generation.
I know it is.
But there are goals, clear goals.
Yeah.
I mean, they're kind of more diffuse than the kind that you're interested in. But they certainly require, I mean, all sorts of simple little collaborative things are being done all the time.
I think that the main strength is building up trust, because you are doing social interaction and awareness about the fact that you're at the Minneapolis airport, right? And so I shouldn't expect some things from you right away. I think that part of collaboration is supported very well on Facebook, but I'm not sure what tasks you're thinking.
I'm thinking of the kind of information that you're not supposed to make use of, and information you can make use of, and that kind of. Yeah.
I just have a comment to add to this. I was thinking that actually from my own experience, if you have time logging to Facebook, let's say when you are in that office or at the airport, so instead of doing that thing that you're supposed to do in the collaboration, you're spending time on Facebook. Well, I personally feel guilty on that, and that's why I have to admit that after adding a lot of my collaborators on Facebook, I started to use Facebook less and less because I feel guilty. I feel that, well, I shouldn't be using that much. Instead, I should show that I'm working on that, on the real work.
I have a personal story on that.
Well, at least I'm showing that I'm not, spending time socializing. I don't know, but
So my nephew and his wife were giving birth. She was in labor, and he was on Facebook. And about every hour, we would get an update on him. And then finally, the last update was Dad, meaning the baby was born. But a lot of us got mad about, why are you on Facebook when your wife's in labor?
Because it's a long, tedious
It is
process.
really fun.
So whatever the balance between synchronous and asynchronous, there are some benefits in synchronous that are remain. About that. You commented about the need for socializing between the remote groups. And so my question about that is whether there's any patterns of exchange during the explicit part of trying to socialize each other. And the other is when there are multiple groups spread around the world, and the time zone problem is insolvable in a way that's really quite profound, and typically gets designed so that the middle of the Pacific is the middle of the night, which is pretty unfair to the people at either end of the Pacific.
Right.
I'm wondering whether there's any pattern of work on trying to deal with that so that the west coast of the U.S. and the east Coast or, sorry, in New Zealand aren't the ones that always get screwed.
It's a power relationship. I mean, you have to see where the center of gravity is for the entire collaboration, and then a good management thing is I'll be waiting up late tonight for this meeting, and then next week you'll be waiting up. So something more even-handed than it's always, you know, East Coast time. And you're asking about patterns of things that were useful. The study we did was in a laboratory, and we asked people to, beforehand, get to know each other. All right, 5 minutes, just get to know each other. Whether that was done face-to-face or by chat was equally good. So people, and then we watched what they do to get to know each other. They're looking for something they have in common. I used to live in Lansing. No, I used to live here. I went to France last summer. All right, oh, I've been to France. Where did you go? And they sort of get into something they have in common. Seemed both face-to-face and chat script.
You've been trying for quite a while, and then
Okay, so sort of along those lines, I think a really interesting problem is keeping both the culture and the sort of implicit understanding of what's going on in, I'm thinking of a company where people aren't all working on the same exact thing,
right.
But as a company scales from having 30 people to having 300 to having 1,000, you know, sort of the lunch table conversations where you know informally what other people are working on sort of go by the wayside. And what have you seen in terms of ways that you can keep that going? So I guess discussion about work, but informal discussion about work. So do you have like an emotional connection to a certain extent, but also just what's going on in this group of people?
Well, there are just, you know, insurmountable problems with scale.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't know everything that's happening at Microsoft or, you know, Google or whatever. So there's real, you know, sort of bandwidth constraints on how much stuff you can keep track of. And you can maybe, with the help of technology, expand that a little bit. But I don't think you can expand it tremendously. So I think it's just, you know, you have to deal with these issues realistically about, you know, devote your time to the things that sort of matter for your work. And if you can be aware of other things, that's nice, but you shouldn't invest a lot of time in it.
But this thing about getting to know what's going on, I have an example of technology that helped that. I was in the Bell system when it broke up. And we developed, not me, but at Bell, they developed something very much like Slashdot. It was called the rumor mill. And you would put in a rumor, and then other people would look at it and rate it on whether it was true or not, right? And then they would get ranked in what you're going to be able to read. And then if you were ranking something high that other people ranked high, right, then you got more points the second time around. The rumor was that management was using that to manage. Right, that's a good idea. We could do that. Right, the ones that most people voted on as what was most likely to happen. That was in 1980.
I like what they're doing at Google places with prediction markets.
Yes, prediction markets is a good example. Dora?
I'm wondering if you have any kind of observations about the different issues between scientific collaborations, business collaborations, medical collaborations, how the task differences drive collaboration differences.
That's exactly what we're studying now.
Well, we're taking the TORSC, and we have now Corp Torque. Take the S out of it and put the Corp in front. And we're taking the same interview items and going out to the corporate world to see what kind of things transfer and what does not. One big difference is you don't have a choice with who you're going to work. All right, that's dictated. The incentives are explicit. Right, it's not do I like this, but my paycheck is dependent on it. And a lot more chance for micromanaging. So some of the very successful, very long distance work we saw was somebody was dictating what everybody was doing. So there's no ambiguity, you know, it came down from the top. And no surprise, the manager was from the military. But we haven't seen a lot of different styles of this, but that's exactly what we're doing now.
And one of the...
Yeah?
Shut up. You know, our son grew up with computer games, and he has now a top 1 position in India. It was interesting for me to learn, to compare his experiences versus what I know about the military. I could invariably point out, well, they did that in World War II, like disrupting communication. Oh, you're breaking up, remember the old black and white movies. All these tricks were there, and all the techniques were there, and they have worldwide communication, they had worldwide tasks, they had collaboration. It's all there. It's really a rich background that you may want to go look. You have to translate. I happen to be interested in analogies and translation, so I can't do it. My son couldn't, but anyway. But to me, it was amazing how essentially everything, not only I could translate, I could even predict. why don't you do this now real time? Why don't you do that? And a year later, oh yeah, I found your URL. I sent them. By the way, what I said is true. Here they did it in your field.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Interesting. Dort, did you have anything to add?
I was just wondering what directions, and if you were also interested in exploring the medical side of
I'd say one
different kind of...
One consequence of moving to Irvine is I've had 3 different people in the medical school approach me about they want to build a collaboratory. And so we may have some more experience in that world as well.
That's medical research. It's not medical practice.
Yeah.
And if we should talk offline then if you've got some interesting opportunities.
But even medical research, they don't have graduate students. They have professional staff doing a lot of the work. So it's a sort of a different culture even than most of the kind of academic research that we studied.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to the topic of better tools, and so you mentioned like in 1980 you had a tool which is basically replicating in what Slashshot is doing today.
Right.
And likewise, I did a web conferencing thing, and today when I look, the same thing is being reinvented today. The only difference is better bandwidth, better graphics, and yes, it might look a little bit better, but the fundamental interaction remains the same. So I want to say, do you see any real innovation happening on the tool side, or are we just rebuilding the same thing in better ways?
Well, let me answer about video conferencing. What they've gotten right these days is what we're calling social ergonomics, that you can make close to eye contact where before you saw the top of my head because the camera is here, or here, which is worse, I'm looking out the door. So you would interpret those things wrong about whether I'm paying attention or not. High resolution matters, so you can actually see where I'm looking, whether I'm paying attention or not, or I'm looking at him who's somewhere else, but it looks to me like, or it looks to you like I'm looking at him, so you can tell those kinds of things. Stereo audio should be out there a lot more than it is because the voice coming from the speaker's position turns out to be a good clue. We had audio conferences between Detroit and France, and unfortunately in the room there were 2 Pierres, one of whom was the manager and one not. And to these people, all Frenchmen sound alike. All right, so that's a case when stereo audio would have been much easier about position. It was this Pierre speaking versus that. And not hard to do, but just not out there very much.
But what about also in asynchronous tools? Well, I feel like there's the same wheel being reinvented and over again. I haven't seen much of it.
Asynchronous. Well, certainly, Facebook and social sites are a lot different than we used to have.
It's also the case there's a movement going on that, at least in a special issue of the journal HCI, it was referred to as the reinvention of email. I mean, email is this fabulously successful asynchronous communication tool. But what Steve Whitaker and others have found is that people use it for much more than just communication. They use it as an address book. They use it as a to-do list. They use it as a project management, workflow thing. All kinds of uses for which it was never designed. But now a lot of people, particularly in companies that make email systems, email clients, are looking at how do we take this fabulously successful tool and modify it to account for all these other functions people use it for. And I think there's some really interesting developments coming down the road there. Steve Whitaker has been doing a lot of this work, for example. Back there.
Have you explored in your research also that a remote collaboration is in corporations a reward mechanism for valuable employees? I mean, I'll give you an example. When I worked at Apple a few years ago, we had one talented software engineer who wanted to move away from Cupertino to the East Coast for personal reasons. It was approved, but it was a special deal. I mean, we had to get approval from the VP. So is that something you addressed in your research?
Is what addressed?
Giving authorization to an employee to work remotely is a reward, kind of a special reward for a valuable employee that they want to keep. So
Yes. We've seen that, and there are policies that surround that about how long they have to be with the company before they can do that, because you can't acculturate somebody from far away, right? So learning the rules of the road about how we work. So in Gary's case, when he was talking about George in the box, he had been with the company 20 years. And that's why the interest is between George and John, because John is just coming on board. Interestingly though, John knows a lot of the people in the group. They're all researchers in the same field as him. So it's not a pure case of coming on board.
Meaning he's met them before.
He's met them a number of times before at conferences and may even have co-authored with some of them. So
Can you meet someone at a distance that would be equivalent to that?
meet somebody.
Well, we've certainly seen instances of that. In fact, I was just talking with somebody earlier this week when I was at the University of Maryland who worked with someone, I think even got to the point of writing a paper with them, having never met face-to-face. And when they finally met face-to-face, it was just so awkward. Because they had built a style of relationship through, chat and audio and so on. And it was just weird to be in the presence of that person. But I don't know of any systematic work on that.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I can give you an example. You may remember radar from MASH.
Yes.
Busy military radar, radio operators, they do that all the time. Many of them
They
have
meet,
never met
yeah, they establish relationships.
They have private links, private discussions to establish that.
Right.
And yes, they know if he's from our side or the other side.
Right. Good. Yes.
See, with respect to kind of the work criteria, I guess that was one thing on the degree of coupling. Also, with respect to sort of the work product, you see, I can think of two extremes. One is the communication that has the ephemeral, and the document that might be an product of the work, might be the final product of the work. Do you see any gradations there, or any other major types of interaction? I want to say document, but not really.
As far as we've gone on that is to look at sort of the microstructure of work and what kind of thing is happening now. Is it generation of ideas? Is it decision making? Is it codifying? And there might be specific tools for different kinds of work. But I'm not sure about the products, looking at it from the view of products. So the answer is no, we haven't thought about it.
Thank you.
Stu's got one more.
You didn't say anything about the impact of computing on this. So both laptops.
Well, I did talk about it a little bit in the context of awareness.
I'm also thinking in terms of iPhones and cell phones that allow you with Twitter and stuff to get it much more fine-grained, much more rapid. Because you're essentially using little blocks of time. Unused. And so it could be possible to get many more feedback cycles per day from somebody in the project.
We haven't done that work. Melissa Mesmanian, who is coming out of MIT and about to move to Irvine, has been doing that kind of work about looking at what do people in various kinds of work use that for, and what the rapid response means to them.
She's particularly been studying blackberries, which is very interesting work, and she did it in several different organizations, which ended up using it very differently, using the technology.
And the people that thought they're going to love it hated it, and the people who thought they're going to hate it loved it. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.